To honor Veterans Day, we had the opportunity to sit down with local author Ken Conklin and his wife Barbara. Ken Conklin, himself a Vietnam veteran, wrote about Tuskegee Airman and Olympic gold medalist Norvel Lee in his book called Norvel, An American Hero.
One of the very inspiring stories for me was when I was researching Norvel Lee's life and talking to his family. I've always felt that the glitter in his life was winning an Olympic gold medal and the civil rights case that he was involved with. But what he did the rest of his life was far more probably telling for him and meaningful to him. And I had reached out to the Washington, D.C. Boxing Commission, and I got a phone call from Henry Jones, who was the ring announcer for Washington, D.C. And he said to me, he had somebody he wanted me to talk with. And so a few days later, I got this person's phone number. I called him. His name is Adrian Davis. Adrian Davis is a well-known boxing trainer in the professional boxing world. And what he told me is he was a 15-year-old juvenile out in the streets of Washington, D.C., when Norvel got in some sort of trouble, and Norvel took him under his wings, introduced, and then he paused for a moment and then told me, he said, his life would not have been what it was if he had not met Norvel Lee. Wow. It was a very telling moment.
Wow.
He also told me that he had, Norvel, for some reason, was on the phone with Rocky Marciano, the famous boxer, and put Adrian on the phone with him so that he could talk to
oh my goodness.
Rocky Marciano. Veterans Day means to me a chance to remember the people I served with in Vietnam, and also the people I've known throughout my life that served in the other world. Well, my time in Vietnam, I was very young. I was 19 years old when I went over there, and what the experience taught me was that it grounded me and made me focus more on what I wanted to do with my life. Yes. I was drafted in September 1966 and did basic training at Fort Ord and did my MOS training at Fort Gordon, Georgia. Okay. First time I rode on an airplane was riding from Monterey, California to Augusta, Georgia. Uh-huh. And then
that was culture shock.
That was culture shock, yes. little propeller plane, and then went from there to Vietnam, and was in Vietnam from 1967 and 68, and returned home to Fort Huachuca, where I spent the last part of my time in the Army.
And what was your job in service?
I was what was called a radio relay and carrier operator, or
what does that mean?
I was part of the 53rd Signal Battalion. We were assigned to different artillery units to supply communications back and forth. So my job as a radio relay and carrier operator was to support these different units that were moving around to different parts of the jungle. So we'd stay 3 or 4 days in one place and load our equipment on board a Chinook helicopter and fly to another place. And
so you were like radioing orders to different places?
We were providing the main site-to-site communication between that unit and their headquarters.
Wow. You wrote this wonderful book here about Norvel Lee, and he was a veteran. Tell us about how that made a connection to you, him being in the service, you being in the service.
Well, my journey of discovering this story really didn't involve, in the beginning, his being a veteran. It's something I discovered along the way, that he was selected for flight training at Tuskegee and is a Tuskegee Airman. And that was an illuminating moment for me regarding his life in general.
So you didn't realize he was
I didn't when I first discovered this story. Well, I suppose I did. The article did make mention of it. That was in the Fincastle Herald, but I did not. I wasn't focused on that. I was focused more on some other aspects of his life. But then that came through very strong at the time. And then after interviewing members of his family and learning that he spent a 30-year career in the Air Force Reserves, and he retired as a lieutenant colonel, that entire connection then was made. Wow. Of course, when he was at Tuskegee, the services were segregated at the time, and so he served in what was known as a colored unit in World War II out in the South Pacific. He was not assigned a fighter unit He earned his wings at Tuskegee, but because he had a stammer, they did not assign him to a fighting unit for flying.
Wow, interesting.
Yes.
Wow. So tell me a little bit about the book itself. Did you write it fictionally or is it more historically? Tell me about your book.
The book is based on mostly historical facts. It's described as historical fiction, but for the most part, this is a true story. One of the very inspiring stories for me was when I was researching Norvel Lee's life and talking to his family. I've always felt that the glitter in his life was winning an Olympic gold medal and the civil rights case that he was involved with. But what he did the rest of his life was far more probably telling for him and meaningful to him. And the reason I say that is by interviewing various members of his family, he and his wife Leslie were very involved in mentorship and community activities and community services. They told me the story, a couple of stories. One, later on he owned a timeshare up at Massanutten. And whenever they would take the family there, he would always make sure they took some inner city kid with them, so they could be exposed to something that they never would have possibly been exposed to before. And then
You can find Ken Cochlin's book, Norvel, An American Hero, at Amazon, Book No Further in Roanoke, and the Botetourt Historical Society in Fincastle, Virginia.